Hello everybody, it's the end of the year and I'm here to spread some Christmas cheer. Here I was ready to finally continue the top 100 best games of all time, only to realize that everyone, myself included, is currently riddled with decade closure nostalgia. So before I get back to the top 100, I'm dropping an avalanche of my 30 best games of the decade upon you. Unlike the top 100, this list is comprised solely by yours truly, so don't be surprised if my opinions differ greatly from your own. At least these hot takes might keep us warm amongst the desolate chill of winter. So pull up a headphone or speaker, get cozy next to the fireplace, and let's talk the best games of the 2010s. Number 30, The Wolf Among Us. At the dawn of the decade, Telltale molded the point-and-click adventure game into a new walkie-talkie episodic format that eventually led to arguably superior imitators such as every Tumblrite's wet dream, Life is Strange. But while games like that pushed the envelope of what could be accomplished within this niche genre, Telltale opted to ignore innovation in favor of crapping out as many mediocre licensed stories as they could whip out of their famously overworked staff. As their format stagnated, their tumultuous development cycle had investors pulling out left and right until the studio shuttered its doors in 2018. Despite the grim ending to the original studio's run, a handful of games remain worthy of mention. Their flagship hit The Walking Dead introduced the format to a wide audience with a memorable cast of characters and gripping narrative that brought the toughest of souls to tears. Tales from the Borderlands is also worth a shout out for its clever writing, expansion of the source material, and advancements on the gameplay end of the spectrum. But for me, the peak of Telltale's reign was their ode to fables in The Wolf Among Us, a story centered around fairy tale characters living in modern-day Manhattan in a self-imposed exile from their homelands. You step into the shoes of Big B Wolf and attempt to solve a murder. Gameplay is primarily handled through dialogue trees, QTEs, and examining various settings for clues. Considering Telltale's stubborn refusal to innovate their formula, choosing The Wolf Among Us as their best work more subjectively leans toward enjoying the setting, world building, characters, and story over games like The Walking Dead and Tales from the Borderlands. There's something about a cast of iconic fairy tale characters living in mundane Manhattan mediocrity amidst a murder mystery investigated by the big bad wolf that just does it for me. And based on the crowd reaction to the recent announcement for The Wolf Among Us 2 from the band formerly known as Telltale Games, I'm not alone. No matter how successful the ventures of the resurrected studio are in the years to come, I'm grateful for the height of their predecessor's success. Number 29, Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag. Assassin's Creed is one of the hallmark franchises of the decade that shifted focus from quality to maximizing revenue. Both are allowed to exist simultaneously, of course. A critically acclaimed stud attracts fans and thereby money. But when you can hand-fist nearly 1,000 developers and millions of marketing dollars behind a yearly uninspired retread that is good enough, and be a top 10 seller regardless, why bother? Assassin's Creed answered this question repeatedly over the decade with astastic entries such as Revelations, Unity, and the abomination that was Assassin's Creed 3. And it all culminated with Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag, the worst Assassin's Creed game of the decade. By that I mean the publishers at Ubisoft were so asleep at the wheel that they signed off on a game barely featuring anything related to assassins at all, which resulted in the greatest pirate game I've ever played. You get to sail the high seas during the golden age of piracy and fight against European influence to maintain your freedom. This is Ubisoft sandboxes at their best. It rides the line of having almost too much to do, but maintains an addicting content drip between tight naval combat, compelling challenges, intriguing story missions, and the joy of exploring the open sea. Ubisoft has been scrambling for years to cash in on this formula's success in their spin-off Skull and Bones, and has improved Assassin's Creed's reputation with bi-yearly releases as of late. But my fondest memories of the decade reside on the Jackdaws singing sea shanties with me crew. Number 28, Dead Cells. High stakes at their finest. One shot to amass enough power matched with skill to beat an entire game in a single go is the essence of what makes roguelikes so addicting. While games like The Binding of Isaac, Darkest Dungeon, and Enter the Gungeon are all worth a nod, my favorite of the decade is Dead Cells. One of the few early access games that convinced me to buy in and deliver, Dead Cells has been an ever-evolving adventure that has added new levels, bosses, weapons, mechanics, and more throughout the last few years. During this time, its quality has remained consistent through excellent side-scroller combat, solid platforming, catchy music, colorful pixel art, and endless creative builds to reach the finish line. Each level is a battle of attrition that simultaneously rewards patience and those daring enough to seek out every treasure within. Every cell spent eases the burden of subsequent runs, and every run builds the skills you need to inch closer to your first victory, one so sweet it ranks among the best of the decade. Number 27, The Beginner's Guide. One of the most critically polarizing entries on my list, and probably the least likely to show up on your own, The Beginner's Guide is a unique gaming experience that is hard to dig into without spoiling its purpose. David Reed's follow-up to the Stanley Parable centers its narrative around how others perceive art. Its use of gameplay and narration through a variety of puzzles plays with your own emotions while giving insight into the fictional characters involved. The many routes your interpretation of The Beginner's Guide can take is a point I took away from the work. You can never fully assume the intent of an artist, and it's hard to remove your own bias. Who knows if I even interpreted the game as Reed intended? Who knows if you're interpreting what I'm saying as I intend? And who's to say that if you comment on the depth or lack thereof in this segment that I'll understand your intent? The philosophical tango I'm dancing around is what I love about The Beginner's Guide. It delivers an interesting narrative that makes you reflect on your relationship with video games through that very medium, and made me pause to consider how I project myself onto the work of others. It's an important topic more than ever in an era where everyone is given a voice online, and it's an experience that I won't soon forget. Number 26, LA Noire. Despite everything I just said, you could probably infer by now that I value storytelling in games and appreciate a good murder mystery. If you have, you'd be correct. Sadly, I feel outside of the ever-present doubt meme, LA Noire is a game that will be forgotten by time. In some ways, maybe that's for the best. The gunplay is middling, the driving is serviceable, and the facial animation that was groundbreaking at the time has been long since surpassed. That said, while the gameplay and graphics may not be the game's strength, they aren't a weakness either. What the game lacks in these departments is more than made up for by interesting mechanics. Investigations, interrogations, and banter between characters makes up the majority of your time in LA Noire, and that's where the game shines. The game takes itself very seriously too, which puts a nice spotlight on the winding story and great characters, but leaves room for unintended levity that adds a welcome B-movie flavor that I find hilarious. The protagonist, Cole, is the most foul-mouthed, loose cannon of a bad cop I've ever seen. The interrogation system relies on accepting truths and doubting lies that lead your suspect to a contradiction you can point out with evidence. But instead of tact, Cole verbally abuses people in such an absurd way that I can't help but laugh.
Enough of the lies. I want answers or I'll smack you around the teeth. You keep lying to me, and I'll send you and your baby to jail. You're full of shit, Jacob. The truth is you hated that bitch.
It may not be perfect, but the settings, story, crime elements, unique mechanics, and passable gameplay keep it alive in my eyes as a gem of the decade. Number 25, Papers, Please. The ratio of simplicity in gameplay to the complex clusterfuck of emotions this game delivers is astounding. The busybody in me gets a morbid sense of joy out of rifling through someone's documentation, finding an error, and stamping them out of line. But as they're shuffled out for the next in line, it becomes all too apparent that you're playing with people's lives. During the significance of your daily monotony, you have to consider your family's well-being on your paltry salary, as little Nikolov gets a cold and has to eat a floorboard for dinner because you got another citation for letting someone cross the border inappropriately. It gets all too real all too quickly. This instilled actual fear in me as opportunities to spark change came my way, and I had to make hard choices as to whether to sacrifice my own self-interest for the betterment of my fellow countrymen. Suffice it to say, this game gave me an existential crisis while maintaining a shamefully satisfying gameplay loop that had me hooked from start to finish. Number 24, Borderlands 2. Simply put, this is the most fun I've ever had in a cooperative game. Borderlands 2 boasts 4th grade humor that my immature ass finds hilarious, addicting gunplay that has incredible variety, 6 classes that are so differentiated it feels like playing 6 different games, a story that gives better characterization to the original Vault Hunters and zany characters of Pandora, the loot grind is dangerously addictive, and the many raids they offer give high value to endgame players. All of this can be done with up to 4 of your friends or solo if you so choose, and each experience has its advantages. Personally, I have loads more fun allying with friends rather than fighting against them in games, and Borderlands provides over hundreds of hours of incredible content to play alongside your friends. It's one of my favorite multiplayer experiences of all time, and though I personally value that a lot less than focused single-player only experiences, it's more than worth a mention as a bright spot of the decade. Number 23, Nier Automata. Cyborg anime waifus and husbandos taking on an extraterrestrial robot army to reclaim Earth for the glory of mankind. What more do you need to know? Nier Automata is unlike anything I've played before and may ever play again. Though the combat is rather simple, it wears out its welcome much later than it should thanks to shifting perspectives, new enemy types, Star Fox-style shootouts, platforming, and hacking segments. The world is barren yet full of personality thanks to its inhabitants. The side quests are basic and even dull at times, but have stories attached to them that make the chore worthwhile. And yes, once again, narrative is king. Most agree the director Yoko Taro has always had that part down pat with past works like Drakengard and the original Nier, but gameplay was never up to par. While it may not be spectacular, it's above average and more than enough to accompany one of the wildest stories I've had the pleasure of going through in years. Every beat of the story is matched by gameplay that adds weight and context, and the soundtrack that accompanies it is one of the best of the decade. The sound design flows seamlessly from frantic loud operatics to mild themes building tension to 16-bit beats that add atmosphere during hacking segments. There is so much care put into every bit of the design, and it really shows. I can't wait to see what Yoko Taro can do with a sequel now that he has mainstream attention and the budget that comes with it. No matter what the future holds, Nier Automata will always be remembered as a launching pad for a wider audience into his crazy creations. Number 22, Hyper Light Drifter. There's something haunting about the way Hyper Light Drifter sticks out in my mind. Anytime I think about it, I can vividly hear those hopeful piano notes that drift off into sorrow. That feeling steeps me deep in imagery of the Drifter's struggle to ward off the shadow-marked disease plaguing him. This is powerful when you consider director Alex Preston's struggle against heart disease as an inspiration for the Drifter's plight. He also took inspiration from the Super Nintendo and wished to create a game faithful to that era. Though I'm all for the flash and pomp that dominated the decade, I respect the effort to pay homage to an older time, especially when it's done so well. The combat mechanics are simple, but have strategic depth with ranged weapons and special moves requiring you to hit targets for ammo. The art style and music creates a dreamlike atmosphere that is powerful in a world free of spoken dialogue. The bosses are memorable, as are the many challenges you'll find throughout the world, and there are so many secrets ranging from easy to insanely difficult to discover that offers as much completionist depth as you want. Artistically, it's beautiful in its simplicity, and though I think that simplicity holds it back in a competition for best game of the decade, it's deep enough to carve out a high honor just outside the top 20. Number 21, Devil May Cry 5. In a way, this game is beautiful in its simplicity as well. Much like Hyper Light Drifter, it's visually stunning in its own way, the soundtrack is killer, and the gameplay is simple. Simple with an astronomical depth that only the most skilled players in the world will reach the pinnacle of, that is. This game is all about style, and it oozes it in droves. My first playthrough on normal was a challenging experience rampant with tough enemy hordes and fantastic bosses. Many chapters weren't even levels, it was just a straight up boss fight. That's my kind of game. But its true strength is undoubtedly the combat. Between the growing difficulty levels offering more enemy types and mechanics, and the style scoring giving high replayability, this is an adrenaline-infused action junkie's dream. Some levels do outstay their welcome a bit. V is very boring in comparison to Nero and Dante, and I can't enjoy the combat on the same level as the most hardened players due to lack of skill on my own end, but I still had a blast claiming A and S ranks on the second hardest difficulty over the summer. And it's a game I can see myself revisiting again and again over the years to rock my way up to smokin' sexy style. But of course, that's just my opinion. Be sure to sound off in the comments on what you thought of today's list. Please leave a like if you enjoyed, and subscribe to see more of the decade's best. In the spirit of the holiday, I want to sincerely say I appreciate every single one of you that watches these videos. I hope you guys have a wonderful holiday with your family. Much love to you, and I'll see you in the next video.